hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ya hey yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ya ya hey ya hey yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya 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 hey ha yo hey yo hey yo Fort Beck Community College Ukiepino yo yo me too gashi dagush kashka yogi piano yo yo wata pepe hagik tabi ichachia ya bino hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ya hey yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ya yo hey ha yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ha hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha yo hey yo hey yo Fort Beck Community College Ukiepino yo yo me too gashi dagush kashka yogi piano yo yo wata pepe hagik tabi ichachia ya bino hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ya hey yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ya yo hey ya hey yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ha hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha hey yo hey yo hey yo Fort Beck Community College Ukiepino yo yo me too gashi dagush kashka yogi piano yo yo wata pepe hagik tabi ichachia ya bino hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ya hey yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ya yo hey ya hey yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ha hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha hey yo hey yo hey yo Fort Beck Community College Ukiepino yo yo me too gashi dagush kashka yogi piano yo yo wata pepe hagik tabi ichachia ya bino hey yo
Home takuepi. Keius Gewan Chian Kampi Chantewastea Johanna Pechu Zapido. Elijah Hopkins Demie. Wana Wakchinja Wakpa Dechia Dayanya Hiripido Matakuepi. Hello, relatives. Again, thank you for joining us here at the Fort Peck Community College Guest Speaker Series. We have our topic today is Assiniboine language and culture. We extended an invitation to Mr. Kenneth Helgeson. He's known as Tuffy. He's a Ayapaha very active in language learning. Assiniboine from the Fort Belknap community in Lodgepole. For as long as I've been around this area, he's always been very engaged and very welcoming, and so we're very appreciative that he took his time to share with us today. So, and those of you that are joining us out there on Facebook, and those of you that are joining us on the Zoom webinar, feel free to give us a like, give us a share, but put any questions that you might have in the chat box, and then we'll do our best to get at those later on in the discussion. So. Tahanshi, again, thank you for joining us today. What I'd like to cover today is just to generally talk about your relationship with the Assiniboine language, the culture. It's my understanding that you're one of our fluent speakers, and so any insights that you have that you want to share, great. I know you're always doing a lot of really inspirational work with the language in the schools and the youth, and so. If you could just maybe briefly introduce yourself, and then we can just kind of have the discussion from there.
I'm Tahashi ne. I'm been handa wa he chen. Ne wa mi o no je mangia chen wa se wa pagichita ha. Who gap do ga be oya de bi je ma cha bi chenish bado pachnatua na kodabi. Je ma cha. Ha ken ne chen wa hine. Dago io magi pi wonk nagabi. My Taha, I'm really glad to be here today to share a little bit with you, whatever I can. I don't know much. They call me Singing Eagle, and I come from Lodgepole, Red Paint Creek. I'm a member of the Bone Chipper clan, and I'm a member of the Prairie Canoe Paddler Band here on Fort Belknap. But I just wanted to, again, thank you, Elijah, for inviting me to speak a little bit about our language and our culture. Chaha homakshina ja mikushi chinchana hunga we jia bishain chachmaya ne. Ne mikushi wanangash ne oyadebi wasewak ba ne Fort Belknap nakon makoche ni timahen umbi mikushi itanch aya bishan. Nish waniedu wanangash ne 1914 mikushi tumbi chaha inkjewi waji en waniedu hante tumbi. Name kushi takona gubine na iuhana nakoni abis no wicha abis chechen gambino ya de bin chachmaya chechen nakoni abi nawahu. So I always talk about kind of where I come from, and I was raised by my grandmother. Her name was Chief Calf Woman. Her English name was Dora First Chief Helgeson, and she was born in 1914 in Lodgepole in February. And so her contemporaries, and she was kind of a leader of her time. She had a lot to do with the schools and the different things, tribal government, all of these types of things. And but when I came along, her big push was the senior citizens complex there in Lodgepole, and she kind of organized that place. And I spent a lot of time with her there and her contemporaries, who all spoke Nakota. I don't know if at that time I really understood Nakota, but I heard it. I heard it pretty much every day. And then as I got older, I listened to the song that you played at the beginning of the podcast there. Our ties as Nakota people, from Fort Belknap to Fort Peck to Mosquito to Carry the Kettle to White Bear, we have blood ties all over as Indian people. And through our culture and then our ceremony, our way of life, then we were exposed, and then even our blood ties, I guess, we were exposed to people like my late uncle, my late father, Bob Forstar, Oliver, Uncle Kenny, just a whole bunch of different folks all throughout Indian country, not only in Fort Peck, but, across the line in Canada. And they were all speakers of the language. Singers maybe, or ceremonial people who practice ceremonies. So my whole life I was kind of exposed to all of that, and I grew up within that. I spent about 18 years teaching in the public schools here in Hayes, Nakota language. And then just recently, in the past 2 years, I moved over, and we're slated to open a daycare immersion center here, probably in a month or so. So that's pretty exciting to see it come that far.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. I think I was following it on a Facebook page. I think it's the Fort Belknap Community Development Corporation, the Life's Learning Lodge. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, Life's Language Lodge.
Life's Language Lodge. Yeah, and so that's for elementary or
It'll be a daycare center 0 to 5 years old.
okay, cool.
But we get to work with the babies this go around. Is something that we've kind of never divulged into. We've always worked with. I primarily taught in the high school. We had teachers in the grade school, and they were kind of setting the prerequisites as they came forward through the classes.
Part of this guest speaker series that we do, and then on Thursdays, Minekshia, Tommy, Christian, Wamnishage, for an hour there on Thursdays from 3 to 4, we always try to talk about mental health, how it's connected to our culture, and especially in the COVID environment, and utilizing these virtual spaces to make connections with students, and that kind of archiving this stuff for educational purposes. And so that's kind of where part of this, we got inspiration from the guest speaker series comes from. And so I guess one of my questions to you might be, how is language and our culture connected from your perspective anyways, to individual health and then community health? I know obviously it's important, but what is your thoughts on that?
Well, lechon, dago wananga washitu bihi behanta ne o wachegi we chashta bicheche gari no chinjabi ungitawa ne je mishwam naga che mikushi ne je mangia. I thought a lot about this as I've taught over the years at the high school, and I always think about our people and how we're they always say we're people of a hoop, that we're people of a circle. And today, in the world that we live in, when you look at the social ills of our communities, because Indian communities, we share the same social ills, no matter which reservation you're on. And it stems back, we talk about historical trauma, but it stems back to those early days when, like my grandmother, for example, she was 8 years old when she went to boarding school, and she was taken out of her aunt's arms by a Jesuit priest, and she couldn't speak English, and she was bound by her ankles and her wrists, and then she was tied to the girl sitting next to her, so on and so forth. They were put in a wagon, and they were taken from Lodgepole to Fort Belknap Agency, which is a 2-day drive by wagon, and they didn't know what was going on, where they were going. So, as a result of those types of things, and then whatever atrocities they experienced in the schools, that set the course for where we are today. And I always thought a lot about it when I was in school. They were, everybody seemed to be looking at the African American style. That was kind of the big deal right then. Everybody wanted to be a baller. Everybody wanted to be a gangster. Everybody wanted to do all of these things, talk funny and wear their caps backwards and big baggy clothes. And I never did really fit in that era. I was more like my parents' era, where when they were trying to live, they were trying to be white people. They were following the rodeo, and they were drinking beer, and they had short hair, and they tried to make sure they always had a job. And so you look at generations and how we've come from my grandmother's generation, who had all of these things that were taken from her, to our generation, where in my family, my grandma raised 9 children and several grandchildren, and I was the last one. But for some reason, it was okay for me to learn to talk Nakota. My grandmother was fluent. That was one thing that she never lost. But out of my whole family, I was the only one that got that. So I think we've borrowed cultures by generation, and maybe to some degree we're still borrowing cultures today. But you know, that has a big impact on this hole in our heart, because every morning when we get up and we look in that mirror, whether we participate in ceremonies, whether we speak our language, whether we dance powwow, whatever it means to be an Indian, when we look in the mirror every morning, we know that we're Indians. We know that innately within us. But maybe some of us are hunters. Maybe that's how we identify as being an Indian. Is every fall, that's what we do. We hunt. Maybe they never participate in learning language, but they hunt every year. Yet others, maybe they're great horsemen. Maybe that's how they identify, you know, as being an Indian. But because of all of this acculturation, we have this wicked hole in our heart. And it's always been my belief that when we put that language, excuse me, when we put that language back in that hole in people's hearts, then our communities are going to start healing. Um, you know, the big thing right now, you watch Facebook, everybody talks about aunties and uncles, and it's a joke. But amongst our people, we never talk like that, because those people are our mothers and they're our fathers. So, and these are things that come out of our language. Our language gives us a worldview that is totally different than an English worldview.
Mm. You know, in visiting with other speakers, other communities too, that's a common thing, is the kinship that's built into the language, um, sign of respect, and I think that's how well, one of the main takeaways that I get out of learning language too, over the years. What do you also, just because embedded within the language is gender roles, in my opinion, you know, there's gender endings. What is your thoughts on how the culture, because things get a little confused nowadays, from my perspective, with like gender roles and what's okay and what's not, you know, because you know, one of my kushi, she passed away several years ago, and sometimes I reflect on things that she would say, you know, and like from her era, you know, she never sweat, you know, back in those days, you know, when she was little, it was just some of the men did. It wasn't a prevalent thing, but now it's more common. And so I don't know if those are the things that are changing. That's just an example, you know, but um, what is your thoughts on that? You know, our gender responsibilities, because a lot of this stuff, our discussion, to me, I like it to funnel it towards our leadership and our character development, you know. And so
You know, in that, I think there were, because my grandmother was of that same era. And one thing that always stuck out in my mind is, until I was 16 years old, we went to church every Sunday faithfully. And during Lent, we gave up something, two things, three things. Um, we fasted Saturday night until we came back from church Sunday morning, and then we would eat breakfast. And my grandmother was a very devout Catholic. And I was 16 years old and she was in her mid 80s. And I got up Sunday morning and I was getting ready to get to church. And I went into her bedroom and she was sitting there in her night clothes and she was smoking. And I said, Dago Doneku. And she said, Oh, Dago Nishin Jenny no tanga. I said, Wana Heabigichu, Wana Wachegi Ekta Uyambita. And she said, Hiami Tagosh. She said, they lied to me all those years. She said, I don't belong there. I never belonged there. She said, I raised my kids and they have a tough life. I raised them trying to be like that. She said, I'm not going back. And for a 16-year-old boy, watching what I considered to be a giant in my life just have a sudden change of heart, and to never go back to the place where I spent most of my life worshiping with her, that was a really big thing. But her too, um, she wouldn't participate in ceremonies like that. She wouldn't join a sweat. She wouldn't dance Sundance. Her her contributions maybe were in prayers in the back, or kind of out of sight, out of mind, um, but still supporting her male relatives that were doing these things. And then, but I want to make it clear that I think too, because of that acculturation, that maybe they didn't know exactly what their role was, what they were supposed to be doing. I know in my late grandfather, his name was John First Chief. He made a Sundance here in Fort Belknap in the 50s. there was pictures of these different old women that would put up the big lodge, the teepee where they would sing. They were specific, like you're talking gender roles that women had to do certain things. But again, if you look at how we've come along and how we have to adapt and how we have to change, the church and English have taught us that there's a time and place for everything, that we pray on Sunday or we pray before we go to bed. And we're all used to that. We're accustomed to that. So I know today a lot of women will participate. They'll join in ceremonies. And my late uncle Bob, he explained a lot of things to us. And it talks about the cycle of the woman, and every 28 days how they're connected to the stars and how their life starts over. And as men, we don't have that connection. That's why we have to do those things. That's why we go sweat, we suffer ourselves, we do those things. But to me, in this day and age, when I see women, a lot of times maybe they're single mothers trying to raise their children. When they go into a sweat or they go fast or they go dance Sundance, I always think that's something kind of beautiful because they don't have to. They suffer enough with what the Creator has already given them, but yet they choose to suffer even more, for their prayer, for their people. That's just kind of my takeaway from that.
Pinama, for sharing that. There's a lot of different questions I have, I guess. But yeah, I just remind the students, whoever's on the call, even if employees, there's a few employees I see that are on the call. If you have any questions, just feel free to utilize the chat here. Let's see here. What are your thoughts, Tahansh, on language learning strategies for adults? I know sometimes it's really cool, depending upon the community. They might have immersion programs in the schools that are developing. What are some good strategies for? I just see it a lot, with no matter what language it is, whether it's Dakota, Nakona, or whatever. Adults that are interested. What recommendations do you have, I guess, to get them started on a good path?
I think a lot of it is application. I've noticed in my lifetime, you get 45 minutes a class period and you teach 7 classes a day or 6 classes a day, whatever that is. And then that student will leave your classroom and they'll step back into an English world where there's nothing Nakota anywhere. I think we always have to work to make our language living. It can't be something of the past. It can't be something that happens only in one classroom or only in one community or only in one house. It has to be something that is lived. And here, I've seen in the past, I'd say maybe 2 years, I've seen a big switch. I think it's just because we've worked so long at these things. But the one place where you do see language and you do hear language a lot is in ceremonies. When you go to ceremonies, they always say that that's the key. That's the key to making those things work, is the use of your language. So here in Fort Belknap in the past couple of years, I've seen this big influx of young people who in Fort Belknap, we have Aani and Nakota. And we've taught, simultaneously over the years, people like Don Racine, Terry Brocky, John Stiffarm, Tommy Shaw, Harris Rock, myself, Alpha Ironman, Minerva Allen, just so many different people, Lauren Lewis, that have put in time. I'm probably missing a whole bunch of them. but they put in so much time and effort in language that today I see where young people can like code switch, and they know when somebody's talking Nakota, they can 75% get the gist of it. When somebody's talking to Ani, they can 75% get the gist of it. And then when they speak, one can speak Nakota and another one can answer in Ani, but they're still having the same conversations.
Hmm.
And it's applied. It's the application of how they live. We were just talking about that in the office this morning. We've been here for about a year, maybe a little over a year, and in that time, you know, that's what you do. So yesterday we went and harvested a buffalo, getting ready for the medicine lodge, and it was about the same time last year we moved into this space here, and from that time there's teepee poles to get, there's medicines to gather, there's juneberries to pick. You live that life of an Indian, and pretty soon your language just becomes it's you're always doing that. It's like a season. You're living the seasons of things, and then the people, your families or your friends who are surrounded by you, eventually, whether they want to or not, because everybody around them is language.
Mm. Mm. Good point. Good point. There's one question from one of our employees or students that is on the webinar here, and she says, "How has COVID impacted the number of fluent language speakers within the context maybe of your community, and what can be done is already happening to record, preserve, and transmit language?"
Really good questions. In Fort Belknap today, and I can't speak for Fort Peck. I don't know the numbers. Like that would be more of like a Mike Turcotte question or Ramey. But here in Fort Belknap, we have, I would say, 3 first language speakers left. A first language speaker is somebody who was born into the language. That's in Nakota. We have no Ani speakers left. The last one passed away, I don't know, maybe 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. But COVID has been really, in a lot of ways, it's terrible. We've lost a lot of people, but also in a lot of ways, here on Fort Belknap, it's kind of reminded us how to be people. And you see more people taking time to get out in the bush to go pick the medicines that they should be picking, or pick the fruits that they should be. It's slowed us way down, and it's brought us back to a little bit closer maybe to what we should be. As far as recording speakers, we have the 3 here, and we spend an awful lot of time, questioning and trying to get recordings. And fluency levels are something, like, people will tell you today that I'm fluent, and maybe in this generation I am fluent, but like next to my grandmother or her generations, I know that's no way in hell possible, because I had a late grandmother, her name was Selena Dittmeyer, and we used to work on a lot of things together, and she was a wordsmith, and she was able just to like create these badass words just on the fly. I remember when late Gilbert Horn passed away, and we wrote his obituary in Nakota, and it talked about him receiving a Purple Heart. And she said, "Just dokene amitagosh." And I said, "Oh, chande maza gispato jechit." And I said, it's a metal heart that's purple. That's what I called it. And she said, "Hiane tugashi na wagandua bachnedabi." She said, "No." She said, it's a pin of the highest pin that the president gives you." And I thought, fuck, it was badass. It was like, wow. I mean, and that was her ability. She was able to create those words just on the fly. And Nakota, I know is a very descriptive language. So you can take any object and you can describe that object in 20 different ways. And people will say, that's not how we say it. That's not how we say it. But the point is, if you describe the object, you know exactly what the heck it is. There were recordings that the University of Indiana had done in the early 70s. And their deal was, I think they were trying to understand when the language shift happened. And this is an age old topic that people have spoke about forever, and they probably will speak about forever. It was the chicken or the egg, who was here first? And was it Dakota? Was it Lakota? Was it Nakota? So I think the linguists in Indiana, they were trying to figure out when this happened, how this happened, and which was the original tongue, I guess. So they did all these surveys throughout, like they started in Kansas and in Nebraska. They went through the Plains tribes, Osage, Pawnee. They came up into the Sioux proper, you know, the Dakotas. They were in Pine Ridge, Crow Creek, came to Fort Peck, came to Fort Belknap, went all over in Canada, and they were surveying speakers. And from that, they made these relationships in these communities. And then they started to really divulge into their work, trying to decide how this happened. I don't think they ever figured out how it happened, but out of that came so much information. I think there were like 1,000 stories that were documented from Nakota people. I think maybe 5 speakers in Fort Peck offered stories. I think there was about 25 in Fort Belknap, some from Carry the Kettle, Mosquito, Lean Man. So there's been a lot of documentation, and then now it's just recently we went down there and we scanned all of these things. We have all of the audio, but now it's to like organize it to get it in a useful fashion so people can hear it, they can see it. It'll probably be a life's work, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I know there's a website. University of Indiana has some stories about like old George Shields and several others. I mean, just talking about old, old stories, which is really cool. I really enjoyed listening to those. Bag, you brought up a lot of good points here. One of the speakers from that community I used to really like listening to, on my father's side of the family, Big B's, Pony Hill. There'd be a old man named Harris Rock. He'd go over there. He'd kind of like be the announcer over the Memorial Day ceremonies and whatnot, and really beautiful to listen to him talk, and but that it kind of brings up a point just for people that are maybe a little bit more advanced in the language. I know that's one of the questions is dialect. Like, what's is that even really a thing? Like, between Fort Peck, Fort Belknap, Carry the Kettle. I know that there's definitely dialects, but to what extent is it tough for language learners? Should they stick to one dialect, or is it? I would imagine probably it's good to get exposure a little bit to all of them because there's probably not enough speakers left to be too picky. But like there was an individual I visited with him. He's a Stony from Morley, Alberta. And that's a little different, but it's very similar, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on that?
So dialect was a thing. Um, it is a thing, and I think we're going to have to at some point in language. I don't like these buzzwords like revitalization and restoration and all these kind of things. Our language has always been here. It's always going to be here. At some point, our people are going to pay attention to that, and they're going to want to know things. Maybe it's in our lifetime, maybe it's not in our lifetime. But I think the idea with what Indiana was as they were working was they recorded all of these different places. So as language evolves, you might get like a cell phone. Okay, we're going to have to pick a word. We're going to have to decide on what we're going to call that. So I think every house or every community, probably every house, would have its own description of a cell phone. And after time, you hear all these descriptions of a cell phone, and one of those words is going to kind of like come to the top. And everybody's just going to naturally say, that's how we say cell phone. While some families might continue to say what they've always said, and it's still descriptive. So I think the point or the value in what had happened in Indiana is as they've collected all these stories, you can see how Fort Peck says certain things. You can see how Fort Belknap says certain things. As far as that goes, you could probably see how Hudeshabina say a certain thing, how Wadopana say a certain thing. You can see per clan or per community. Um, I was visiting with Mike one day and I asked him, I said, what does the word Guji mean? Because when I go to Fort Peck, I hear that word a lot. And I don't know what that means. I don't know if that's a Nakota word or a Dakota word or a Lakota word, but here we don't say that word. Another one might be the number 7. On Fort Belknap, when we say 7, we say Iushna. Every place else says Shagoi, but we say Iushna. And that really means to rest. So that came from the church, right? On the 7th day, he rested. But we're the only ones that say it. Um, my nephew, my son, we were sitting here this morning, we were talking about a calendar. Um, that's something that I've always really thought a lot about was how this calendar, these moon systems work. So when you get days of the week in Fort Peck, they might say Tiu Jaja Amba. That's the day you wash your house for Saturday. But here we say Wowi Chaku Amba. That's the day they give rations. Those are dialectical things. At one point in our history, when there were numerous speakers, that was a real thing. But today, I think because we have so few speakers, we have to use what we got, and as it keeps growing, those things will reappear probably. And we have the resources to know what was in what place. I think a dictionary at some point, Indiana database, they have about 10,000 word entries in a dictionary. We have to go through all of these stories, and because there's verbiage within these stories that don't appear in the dictionary. So we have to get those words into the dictionary. Um, but the database will be able to identify this is how you say car in Fort Peck. This is how they say it in Carry the Kettle. This is how they say it. And then oddly enough, linguistically speaking, Fort Belknap and Carry the Kettle are the closest speakers together. Um, their language is almost on par. And yet Carry the Kettle, there's one family that transposes a K and a T. So we say Aktaga, they say Atkaga every time. And it's just one family that does that. It's pretty unique. It's interesting.
Yeah, that is definitely. Another interesting thing, I think it was really specific to Fort Belknap community. They were, I think, one of the last communities to really utilize sign language when they talk. I could be wrong, but I did some research and I was trying to learn it. And there was a lady that I think she was there back in the 80s. I forget her name, but she did some work, some academic work, and researched it. But it's kind of a mini movement that I think is really interesting to bring it back, just because it doesn't appear a lot of speakers know how to do it, but they like to use their hands. That's human nature. I think we're like over there, like my China Mitawa Marty Rematch. He uses his lips a lot. He's always going way over there like that. Yeah, not that far. But
well, that old lady, her name was Nambewa Kawi, Holy Hand Woman, and her English name was Rosie Weasel. And when we were working on translating her stories in Indiana, it was so confusing because in Nakota, there is no word for he or she. So when she's telling a story, we never knew who the hell was doing what in the story. He might, or she could jump on the horse and run down a canyon and steal a fish or whatever, but we never, she talked so fast, we never knew who was doing what. And even our most fluent speakers that we traveled down there, see, I'd traveled down there about maybe 6 times in my life to translate these stories with really old people. They would just get frustrated because they didn't know who was doing what in the story. And then one day, the lady says, well, let's watch the video. So we watched the video of Rosie telling her story, and how she would do it is she would start out with, you know, a long time ago like this, and then she'd make a circle like a teepee, and she'd set every character in a different place in that teepee. And as she was talking, she would point to that character. And then all of a sudden, everything was just clear. And we knew exactly who was doing what in the story because we could see where she was pointing. A couple years ago, I had the pleasure of announcing Kiayo with Chief Earl Oldperson. And we were sitting kind of a little up higher, and then down on the floor there, the host drum was Black Otter. And there was an old man, an old blood man. I think his name was Bruce Wolfchild. And you know, the powwow ambience, you can't hear anything, everybody's hollering. I watched Earl and Bruce all weekend. I watched them converse. And Earl was like really low, soft spoken, but he was talking with his hands. And that old guy down on the bottom, his mouth was moving, but his hands were moving, Simon. And they were just having the best time all weekend long. And then pretty soon I plumb forgot about the powwow, and I was just watching these two old fellas talk sign language. I was like, holy damn, that's cool.
Wow, that's really cool. To what extent, I guess, do you utilize it? Is there a part, do you see some of that left over from some of the contemporary speakers that are left in our community, or is it kind of a washed down version of it, and can we bring it back? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it can come back. I know Dr. Lanny Realbird and Crow has done a lot of work, and I think the Crows still have a few people who use their hands. And the good thing about sign language is it was from coast to coast. All people spoke it the same. So I mean, you could imagine riding up on Hidatsas, not understanding their language. You needed some form of communication, so their hands were always moving. And again, like Grandma Rosie's videos, there was a lady in the 80s, her name was Brenda Farnell, I believe, and she was out of the University of Indiana. She actually wrote an alphabet and a key and all of these things, and a book about Rosie speaking Plains Indian Sign Language. Well, the book is so beyond my computation. I mean, they're using all these big wicked words. I have to have a thesaurus to try to understand it. But I think it would be worth, trying to track this Brenda down to have her teach us, because evidently it made sense to her. She was able to produce all this stuff. But then again, we still have the videos, we still have the things of our ancestors. And a lot of times it happened because maybe people were unable to speak or unable to hear, like a grandchild or something. And so that transcended generations. And there were still people in every community that had that one person who still knew Indian Sign Language. It's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that would be super interesting to see how they could bring that back. Because I bought that book too. I think it was called Do You See What I Mean? She was the author of that.
Yeah.
I read the introduction, then after that, it was very, very academic, linguistic terminology. So it was hard to read for me without some training. So that would be awesome to be a part of that down the road. There is one student, I believe, on our Facebook feed. She has a question. Becky says, how can educators incorporate best practices to embrace cultural sensitivity to the trauma that Native Americans carry with them? So you kind of addressed some of that earlier, but if you want to touch on that one, that would be good.
I think, it really depends on place. Like one thing that I know is in our country, you utilize what the tools that are available to you. In Fort Peck, I know great, awesome people that are resources, living resources. Um, and I think that interaction, that human interaction between students and educators, bring them into your schools, bring them into your classes, let them visit with your students, let them share. A lot of times we go above and beyond trying to learn the best practice of this, the best practice of that. Our school districts will spend thousands upon thousands of dollars to send for people to come teach us how to do these things when we have these resources that are sitting right in our communities. And then on top of that, we expect to take them a pack of cigarettes and say, come talk to these kids, spend the whole day over there listening to, talking to these kids. And this is what you get, is this pack of cigarettes. We have to realign these things because they don't work right for us. We need to utilize the people that are there. I think about all the folks that I mentioned in your country down there. There's so many great resources, people that I go out of my way to go see, to learn from. And, kind of in line with all of these things, education is 8 hours a day, and things are compartmentalized. But, it's 3 hours for me to travel from here to Fort Peck. But when there's something I want to know, something I need to know, I make that trip. I make my offerings, and I do it the best way I can because that's how I was raised to do things. So utilize your resources.
Watch that. You make a good point there. I heard somebody say that, tobacco doesn't fill up their vehicle, their tank of their truck. So there's something to think about for the students that are listening. That topic has also came up a little bit in discussions with actually Tommy Christian on our Thursday podcast about utilizing existing resources. And we have a student leadership development program that we're trying to create at the college, where we try and recognize existing resources in our community, individuals like Tahanshi Mike and Nat Side and different individuals so that way they can have a land-based experiential learning, and we can get out. Now is the season, there's a season for everything, as you well know, you described that, but getting them out there, connecting them with resources. So that way it isn't just, it isn't always virtual. It's not always academic. They can get out and it's through that camaraderie is what we're trying to create a space for them to feel comfortable, whether it's something as simple as like, hey boys, let's load up. We're going to go over to Snake Butte and go visit Tahanshi, Tuffy over there and grab some sweat rocks and then come back.
Yep.
And on the way, you can see sleeping buffalo, stuff like that. I think even though it might seem simple, but that's how we keep that connection and bring new people into the fold, and they can visit other communities. And that's how we can get that camaraderie. So it's an ongoing discussion, but thank you for sharing that, Tahanshi. I think we're about at the top of the hour. Again, I want to thank you for joining us, Tahansh. Maybe down the road, we'll welcome you back. I know you're a busy guy, but you definitely contributed a lot to our discussions, and we really appreciate that. So do you have any other parting comments that you want to share? Or
no, just a chaga na niko de no nemne heichiapo. We gotta quit. I always think we have to quit separating ourselves, and we're Indians. And there's an old stupid cowboy song that I never forget my whole life. It's do what you do well, son. We're Indians. That's what we are. And we cannot put that in the closet and it only comes out when we're having red bottom, or it only comes out when we're at Poplar Indian Days. We're Indians every day. And we have to make that work for us.
It's true. Okay, pidame Tahansh. Kepi doksta ke ampetu aste hapo.
Hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ya hey yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ya hey ya hey yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya 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 hey ha yo hey yo Fort Beck Community College, Ukiepi no yo, me too gashi dagush kashka iogi piano yo.